Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Laravel meetup. We had a little break during the summer. I very much enjoyed that, and I hope that you had an excellent holiday as well if you went on holiday in that period. I feel refreshed and I'm ready back for another series of awesome meetups. And I'm very excited by this one. We again have two wonderful guests here. Later on, we'll have a talk by Luke Downing about Pest. And I've already seen a little preview, and there are some amazing things to be seen there. So if you don't know Pest, yeah, this will be a very nice, though fast introduction. And if you already know Pest, yeah, then you're going to see some very cool stuff first. But first, we have another guest. I have with me Aaron Francis, and he's going to talk a little bit about a package that he made called Sidecar. So let's have him on. Hey, Aaron, how are you doing, man?
Hey, good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad that you could come on. I've heard lots of things about the things that you are creating, like Torchlight. I saw a series of tweets by you, with some amazing, yeah, robots. I think, which
Yeah, some
totally,
handwriting robots.
yeah, man, that totally blew my mind. Um, and of course, what we're going to talk about today, and that is Sidecar. Now, before you head into the talk, I'd like to ask you one question. Yeah, how did you got started with the idea for Sidecar?
Yeah, so I was actually developing Torchlight, which is a syntax highlighting tool, and I needed access to Node, and I was running Torchlight on Vapor, and so I didn't have access to Node. I could have, bailed out and done the container thing, but I really didn't want to do that, and so I was trying to figure out how can I run Node without having to set up infrastructure, and that's kind of where we ended up with Sidecar.
Cool. So it's really born out of a need of your own.
Yep,
Personally,
exactly.
I think that the best side projects are just born that way because you want to scratch your own itch.
Yep.
Okay, man. Is it okay if I show the people your screen?
Yep. Let me switch over to slides. Okay. Yep. And if you
Here
need
we.
anything, just chime in. I won't be watching chat, so just talk to me if you need anything.
All right, all right. Okay, Aaron, the stage is yours. Take it away, man. Have fun.
Okay. Thanks. Well, thanks for putting this together, Frank. This is my first live talk, live coding session, so I'm super stoked to be here. So, like you said, we're going to talk about a little bit of Lambda. We're going to go over a package called Sidecar that I wrote. But before we do that, just a little background on who I am. You can find me on Twitter at Aaron D. Francis. I'm a software developer in Dallas, Texas, here in the United States. Torchlight is a software as a service that I've been developing that does syntax highlighting. And then the package that we're going to talk about today is called Sidecar. And you can find that at hammerstone.dev/sidecar. More important than any of that is I'm a new dad to twins. So I've got two 4.5-month-old babies. So that's probably the most exciting thing for me, but not what y'all are here to talk about. So
Congratulations.
let's, yeah, thanks. It's been a wild ride. Okay, so let's talk about like what the actual problem that we're trying to solve here is. And what we're trying to solve for is we have all of this great hosting optimized for PHP, and we have a couple that are like specifically tuned for Laravel, which is fantastic and doesn't seem like a problem. So we have, Forge and Vapor, Forge plus Envoyer and Vapor, and those are hosting providers that basically give us like more or less one click deploy, and your Laravel app is live to the world. So this is, fantastic news. Makes my life easy. I don't want to be the server guy. I'll let, Fideloper be the server guy. I just want to be able to deploy my app and see it live. And we've got a couple others that aren't first party that are probably very good, but I only use the first party ones because they're just so perfect. So with those first party Hosting, it's great when all you need is to live inside a Laravel application, and it does so much for you. But what about when you want to do server-side rendering? Like with Inertia's new SSR coming out soon, you're going to need Node to be able to render, to do the actual server-side rendering. Or if you wanted to orchestrate headless Chrome, or if you wanted to do some kind of 3D rendering, massive parallel, someone is using Sidecar to render like 700 3D renders all at once, and it just kind of blows my mind. But when you get into these situations, you either have to take on the burden of installing and maintaining these other languages, or um, you have to figure out a way to work around it, right? So, and then with Vapor, like I was talking about, you don't really have access to the underlying system. So with Forge, you can get in there and install Node or Python or Ruby, but then you're maintaining Node, Python, or Ruby. But with Vapor, you can't even, like, you have to bail out and do the container. You can't use the native stuff anymore. So that leads us to a place where we may have perfect Laravel hosting, but we need to do one other, thing, like just use a single node library for a very particular setup. So the solution would be you could use a whole lot of Lambda, right? So you could use Lambda as it was intended to be used. And, for a little bit of background, Lambda is Amazon's like serverless functions, functions as a service kind of thing. So you just deploy just specifically the code that you're wanting to run and all of its dependencies. And then you let AWS handle the rest. You don't care, like you don't have access to the server, you don't care about the server. A request comes in, they'll make sure that your code gets run and they'll send the response back. So there are good ways to use Lambda, but they're all pretty heavy. The serverless framework is good, but then you're in this situation where you've got your Laravel app in one repo, and then you've got your serverless app in another repo. The deployments are run separately. They can get out of sync both in the deployments and the development. So you're trying to keep these two things in sync. Like it's all one application, but now it lives in two places. It's deployed in two places. They're talking to each other, usually over the public internet. So you got to set up API gateway. You have to secure your Lambda so that nobody else can call it. Only you can call it. And there is Vercel, which takes away some of that, but still you have a lot of the same like separate repos, separate deployment processes, public internet, all of that kind of stuff. So what we're going to talk about today is using just a little bit of Lambda through Sidecar to solve this problem of I need a piece of node. And so with Sidecar, the Lambdas live inside your Laravel application. They're deployed alongside your Laravel application, and they're executed only through your Laravel application. So instead of having two repos, you've got one. Instead of having two deploy processes, you've got one. And then you don't have to secure like an API endpoint because there is no API endpoint. There is only executing it through Laravel. And so it takes the complexity of like vanilla Lambda and kind of turns it into the ease of use of Vapor, but for everything that's not PHP, right? So Vapor handles PHP, and then Sidecar will handle everything else. And Sidecar can run anywhere. It doesn't have to be Vapor. And Sidecar doesn't manage API gateway, databases, resources, anything. The only thing it concerns itself with is the packaging, deploying, and executing of Lambdas. So as Taylor would say, as DHH would say, show me the code. So let's take a look at some of the actual code of how this stuff works so we can see how easy it is. So I have here a vanilla, just plain Laravel application. I have installed, so I have composer required Hammerstone /Sidecar. So that is the package that we're going to be talking about, and that's the part that manages all of this behind the scenes for us. So first thing we're going to do is artisan sidecar install, and that's just going to publish a configuration file for us. There's a lot of stuff here, and we're not going to cover hardly all of it. The documentation is pretty thorough. I tried to make it as thorough as possible, so where I skip over stuff, it should be covered in the docs. But let's look at the sidecar configuration file. So all of this stuff is just setting up some normal defaults like the amount of memory, how long they should be allowed to run, that sort of thing. What we care about right now is this function registry. This is where we're going to put all of the functions that we create so that Sidecar knows, okay, I got to deploy, the render OG image, and I got to deploy process thumbnail. So those don't actually exist. So we're going to get rid of those. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to deploy a basic hello world Lambda. And so every Lambda requires two things. We're going to call this basic, and we're going to call this index.js. Every Lambda requires two things. One is the package of files that you want to upload to Lambda, and the other is kind of like a PHP configuration class. So for this one, I have a little bit of code here. All right. This one is just going to say hello from Lambda. This probably looks pretty familiar to people who have done some JavaScript. What we're doing is we have an export named handler, and it just returns the string hello from Lambda. That's all that this does. So we're going to create, so that's the actual stuff that runs on Lambda, and now we're going to create the Laravel side of that. So let's create a new class called, what did we call this? Basic. Okay, new class basic extends Lambda function. So Sidecar ships with an abstract class called Lambda function, and it has all kinds of stuff under the hood, but importantly, it enforces that two methods must be there. So we're going to have PHP Storm implement those or stub those out. And these are the two things that I talked about, the package and the handler. So for the package, check the comment in the parent class. It says all the directories and files needed to run your function. Okay, that makes enough sense. We're going to say, since we are in Sidecar basic index, let's just deploy Sidecar basic. We're going to deploy that whole directory. And then our handler it has to follow this specific format that AWS requires. So it's the path to the file and then the named export. So our file is called index.js and our export is called handler. So we're going to say index.js, you leave off the extension, and then the named export handler. So that's it. That's all that's required. So now Sidecar knows what to ship to AWS, and AWS knows what to call when it's executed. So we need to add this to our registry. We're going to say basic class. Okay, so now Sidecar knows those are all the functions I have. Let's jump back over here and pray to the AWS gods. Sidecar deploy -- activate. Phew, hurdle number 1. Okay, what just happened? So Sidecar said, I'm going to deploy that function that you registered, app sidecar basic. I'm going to deploy it to Lambda as sidecar, name of my application, environment is local, and name of the function. All of that's configurable. That's just the default. Then it gives you some helpful information about kind of what's going on here. The environment is local. Sidecar will separate it by environment. So each person, each team member can have their own environment, staging can have an environment, and production can have an environment. We're deploying a zip file. You can deploy containers. This just happens to be a zip. The runtime by default is node 14. This Lambda function did not exist, and so it had to create a new one. And then it packaged everything up, created a zip file, put it on S3, which is, a requirement. And then because we said activate, it activated the function so that we could start using it. If we didn't call activate, it would just be sitting there waiting to be activated, and you couldn't use it yet. I'll explain that later. So creating alias for version 1, which means, okay, the version you just uploaded is ready to go. Let's take a look and see. So I'm in my AWS console. Hopefully there's no secret keys here. I'm in my AWS console. You can see what Sidecar told us just happened did in fact just happen. So last modified 1 minute ago. Click in here. You can see Sidecar basic index. So far, Sidecar has packaged and deployed an AWS Lambda. So let's see if we can make it execute. So that's out there on AWS now. Let's jump over here. And instead of saying hello, we want to run the thing we just deployed, right? So let's just see if, with any luck, this is hurdle number 2. Hello from Lambda. Live coding is working. Okay. So what just happened is Laravel called a Lambda. The Lambda executed, returned the response, and the response came back to the browser, which seems kind of insane. So let's just prove once again that worked. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to pull a random AWS environment variable out of their little environment and plop it into our string, just to be triple sure that we're not running this on our local machine. Not. Okay, so we've updated the handler code, which means we need to redeploy the function. You can see lickety split, it is done. This time it said the function already exists, potentially updating. It created a new zip, and then it said activating version 2. So that's that activating flag. We needed to make sure that the new one we deployed is now active. So, hello from AWS Lambda Node.js 14.x Lambda. So now we're 100% sure we're running on Lambda. We pulled an environment variable out of the AWS environment and returned it back. So at this point, we have the pipeline totally proven. We've been able to write a JavaScript function locally, deploy it to Lambda, and call it through Laravel. It gets even wackier. So if we do, let's see, what do we want to, I think it's runtime. So by default, if you look in the parent class, I just set Node.js 14. It could have been anything. Node seemed reasonable enough. But if you look on AWS's documentation, you can run all kinds of different stuff, right? So if you, for whatever reason, I'm not here to judge, if you wanted to run Java 11 from your Laravel application or .NET Core 3.1, I don't even really know what that is. If you wanted to do that, you could. So we're going to run Python just to prove that. So instead of, back to our function, instead of whatever we were just running, which I think was Node 14, we're going to run Python 2.7. So that does mean index.js is going to be no good because it's going to be looking for index.py. So I had to find this on the internet because likewise I do not know Python. Now our handler is a Python function, and it's going to say hello from Python and then do the same thing. It's going to get the execution environment out. So let's look to make sure. So we're deploying the whole package, or the whole directory. So our index.py will go. It's still named index, so we don't have to worry about that. And it's still called handler, so we don't have to worry about that. So if we run this again, you'll see here the runtime was changed to 2.7 and version 3 is now active. And that should, there you go, AWS Lambda Python 2.7. So now you're running, well, I'm running, now you're running Python without having to have Python installed on your machine, which is pretty nice. So let's look at something a little bit cooler. Let's close all of that nonsense. Let us generate an image. So once you start to realize like, oh, I could run anything from anywhere, then that's when your mind starts to go kind of crazy and be like, well, what do I want to do? So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to generate some images on Lambda and send them back to Laravel. So in this case, this is just a very tiny, very hideous bit of JavaScript that I wrote that's going to use Node Canvas to basically just draw an image. And graphic design is my passion, but this is a hideous image, so just be aware. One thing that we do here is we add a font called Helvetica. We add it to the canvas so that we can later use it, but we need to deploy that font alongside it. So I have those fonts backed up here. It's just all the true type, whatever. So let's copy that and put it in here. So this is showing you that you can deploy anything you want. There are certain size limits, but you can deploy anything you want and then reference it in your Lambda. So it doesn't just have to be the handler. It could be an entire node modules folder if you wanted to. All right, so this is our handler. What it's going to do is it's going to generate an image with the text hello LWW on it. Okay, that's the handler side. Let's jump back to the PHP side. We'll do new class and we will call it image and we'll say extends, what's it called? Lambda function, add the stubs. In this case, we're going to use a little bit different. There's the array format, but you can also do package make set base path to sidecar image, I believe is what it is. So that's the base path, and then we just want to include just everything that's in there. So just deploy everything. And because now we've kind of changed the base path, this part gets easier. So we just do index.handler instead of the whole, file folder thing. Index.handler, good. Okay. Index.handler package is sidecar image, deploy the whole thing. Let's jump over to our registry. I'm going to turn this off. You can deploy as many as you want, but just because it's a demo, I'm going to turn that one off. Okay, so now we are ready to hopefully deploy our second Lambda. Let's clear that out, deploy and activate. There goes image, local node, alias. Okay, so we're all live and ready to go. Now let's see if we can make this work. Image, execute. With any luck, this will be a base 64 encoded. Oh, so it says it's ginormous, but it said it can't find module canvas. I forgot one very important thing. Fortunately, I know what. So I said up here we're going to require canvas. I didn't ship my node modules folder, but one thing that you can do is you can reference layers. And what layers are is they're little extra bits of code, either provided by you or provided by the community, that AWS will add into your package for you. So in this case, what we're going to do is somebody out there in the world has compiled Node Canvas specifically for Lambda, and so we're just going to take advantage of that. So I'm going to tell Sidecar I've got these 2 extra layers, and those layers are compatible with Node 12, and I don't want to recompile them. So we will deploy activate one more time. So now it's going to have to add the layers, activating. Now Node Canvas should be available. Great. So it kind of worked, but that's not an image. base 64. So, which is what we expected, because if you look at the handler here, it returns a base 64 encoded version. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say that the result equals the execution. Saved. The result equals execution, and then we're going to base 64 decode it, and then return it with the proper header. Base 64 decode, return with image JPEG. We don't have to redeploy because we only changed the PHP side. So like I said, graphic design is my passion, and here's this beautiful image that I've come up with. So what happened is the browser hit Laravel, Laravel hit Lambda, Lambda drew an image, gave it back to Laravel, gave it back to the browser with the correct headers, right? We have added a nice little way to kind of like encapsulate this. So it would be nicer to just return the execution, right? So these classes do, I forget what it's called. I think it's toResponse. Yeah. So if you in your sidecar class, if you're always going to be generating an image, you can just always return an image. And I think that is the right way to do it. toResponse. There you go. So now we're back to the nice, neat, I just want to return the execution part. So we can get even cooler, if that's not cool enough, by taking in information from Laravel and using it in our Lambda. So we had this hard-coded hello LWW. We're just going to pull a value off of this event here. And this event is provided to us by AWS. But the way that Sidecar is set up, you can send stuff through that event and it's just ready to go. So we did change the handler, which means we need to redeploy, and it will notice that something has changed. So it's creating a new zip file. It does like a MD5 hash of everything to make sure that stuff has changed. So image number 3, yes, we should see undefined here. Classic JavaScript. So then what we can do is just say text hello from Laravel. Let's be excited about it. Okay, so now Laravel has sent along some extra information. Lambda has picked it up, used it, and sent the response back, which of course means you can do anything. You control both of them. You control Laravel, you control the Lambda, so you can set it up to do whatever you want, which I think is a good... Yeah, let's look at the next one, because the next one gets even a little more sophisticated. So if we do... We're going to create one. We're going to create a Lambda that is going to drive headless Chrome through Puppeteer, take some screenshots, and send it back. So let's do the same thing. Extends Lambda function, add our method stubs. This one, because it's driving Chrome, it's going to be a little heavier. So we're going to up the memory on this one to 4098. And so with AWS Lambda, the more memory you give it, the more CPU you get. It's a wacky calculation, but I promise that it's true. So let's see. We have another layer here. Someone out there has built Chrome specifically for Lambda. So you can look at it here. Google Chrome for AWS Lambda as a layer. It doesn't get more perfect than that. So we're going to use that so that we don't have to compile Chrome for AWS Lambda. So we're going to use that. Our package is going to be, let's just copy this. We're going to use the same package make, set it to sidecar screenshot, and include the whole directory. And there's currently nothing in that directory. So let's do index.js. That's where we're going to put our handler. that. And so because we set the base path, then we can just use the file. The handler is index.handler. Send the whole screenshot directory. It's heavier, so we need to use more memory and use the Chrome layer. Okay, I think that's good so far. And then the actual handler is another similarly complex. So we'll just walk through real quick what's going on. So we're going to pull Chromium out, and that comes from the layer. So I'm not having to ship node modules or anything, which you can do. But that comes from the layer. So the layer will provide Chrome AWS Lambda. I'm just going to require it. Then we're going to get a browser instance by launching it, setting up some stuff. And then in our handler function, we're going to set up the viewport. We're going to go to whatever URL we pass in. So that's going to come from the Laravel side. And then we're going to take a screenshot and send it back. So here's the screenshot. Image is await page.screenshot. And then we're going to send it back along with some extra, meta information. So we can use that back in Laravel if we need to. Okay, so I think we're good. So we've got the whole handler. It's named handler. It returns the stuff, memory layers, package handler. And let's just turn that one off. Screenshot class. So now we're registering it to let Sidecar know you need to deploy this one. Okay, screenshot. Creating new function. Alias version 1. Okay, good so far. So now we can do, let's say, let's just go ahead and do this. Let's just return, screenshot, execute, URL. Let's see if Google allows such a thing. Coming from Lambda, you may not be able to access everything, but if they allow that, then we're good. We do need to implement the toResponse method, because if you look at what we're actually returning from the handler, we're returning a base64 encoded image, but it's also nested in this object. And so we're going to return, we need to basically do the same thing we did last time, which is turn it into a real image. So let's do toResponse. Same deal as before. The body is the result, which is passed into you from Sidecar. Then you base64 decode our special key that we set it as. We set it as image. Then we're going to return the image with a header of whatever type of image. So in this case, by default, I think it's JPEG. Okay, so now let's see if we can execute a screenshot, headless Chrome, headless Chrome on Lambda. So it is a cold boot, so it's going to take a second, and then it's going to have to launch Chrome for the first time. But ta-da, it's a screenshot. So Laravel called Lambda. Lambda launched Chrome. Chrome went out to google.com. Then Puppeteer took a screenshot of that, base64 encoded it, and sent it back to Laravel. So, I mean, it's controllable, right? So now that it's no longer cold, this should be faster. So it's not cold booting the container, and it's also got an instance of the browser cached, and so it doesn't have to do that again. So you can see that the time gets a lot faster. And depending on how you set up your handler, you can do all kinds of crazy things. Like you can make your handler as dynamic as you want. So our handler in this case, we did, here we go. Let viewport equals 1200 by 630 with a doubling for retina. But also destructure event.viewport. So if you send in viewport, it's going to overwrite these two things. So then on your Laravel side, you can just say, you know what, I want it 400 by 400. And it should come back as 800 by 800. There you go, because it's doubled, it's pixel doubled. So I hope that gives you some kind of like pathways to be thinking about how dynamic can I make my handler such that I don't have to keep redeploying it all the time. I can just deploy it for big changes, and I can control everything from the Laravel side. So last one, I want to show, this one is going to be super quick. I want to show one super nice thing that Sidecar can handle for you. All that we've been doing here is kind of like request response, like do a thing, give me the response, do a thing, give me the response. Some people, I asked on the Sidecar repo, I asked some people like, hey, what are you using Sidecar for? Because I'm just like, generate an image. And some people were like, I'm spinning up screencasts, I'm using Python to render 3D models. So one really nice thing that you can do with Sidecar is, well, let's just show you. Let me just show you. So this handler, all it's going to do is return a UID. So it's just going to return a super long random string. But before it does that, it's going to sleep for a full second. So it's just going to make a promise that resolves after 1,000 milliseconds. So this, you would expect, will take about a second, right? So we can copy the basic one and call this random, and we'll let that default to 14. Okay, so we have a random function in the random folder with index.handler, handler, and it's just going to return a string. Random, sidecar random, sidecar random. Let's add it to our registry here. Random. And let's deploy this. Random, creating new. That was fast. Okay, so return random execute. We would expect this to take about a second. The first one's going to take longer because it's cold booting. So 1.2, 1.2, 1.2. Yeah, that's about right. Now, if you wanted to get 5, or I don't want to wait that long. If you wanted to get 3 of these things, you would do it like this. But this is going to take 3 seconds or more. So you've got 3 functions. You can see 3 UIDs all coming back. It takes about 3 seconds. Which, if you're doing like 1 and 1, 1 and 1, it's fine. Just wait for it. But if you're trying to, spin off like 80 lambdas, you don't want to wait for it. So we have a way. Let's do execute many, and instead of executing 3, we're going to execute, let's say 10. So let's get rid of this. We're going to say the results equals 10 executions. And then I think we do return, collect, results, higher order map, pull out the body. So what this is going to do is it's going to execute 10 lambdas, map through the responses or the results, and pluck out the body, which should be the UUID. Let's watch the time. So we just got 10 of them. You can see them all there in the same time, more or less, that it took to get 1. Right? So we're doing 10 in 1.3 seconds versus 1 in 1.2 seconds. And this is when I said there's some guy running, 700 concurrent. This is what I'm talking about. This is what he's doing. He's running, for whatever reason, he's running 700 async executions, right? So that's really useful in cases where maybe you're doing a bunch of different things, and you can pass through. I mean, you can pass through different payloads. This function doesn't accept a payload, so it doesn't really matter. But you can pass through different payloads, and they'll all get executed. In this case, it doesn't do anything. So you can pass through as many as you want, fully loaded payloads and everything. And what Sidecar is going to do under the hood is it's going to dispatch all of them, and then it's going to wait. Once they're all dispatched, then it's going to wait for the responses to come back and collect them all together. If you wanted to, you could also, let's say you wanted to execute 15 async. In this case, it's not going to wait at all. So it totally breaks out of the request response cycle. They're out there running on Lambda, but it's not going to wait for them. So you can see we're getting it back in default Laravel times. So you can do execute mini async, you can do execute async, and pass through a payload. So there are tons and tons of different things that you can do with Sidecar, even just in terms of execution, not to mention in terms of deploying a container, deploying any sort of runtime that you can find, anything like that you can do. So hopefully this gives you some kind of insight into, like, the next time you're trying to reach for just one node or one Ruby or one Python script, you're not thinking, well, now I got to go set up Vercel, or I got to go figure out the serverless framework. Hopefully you can look at this and see, okay, I can keep it within my Laravel stack. Like, I'm just doing one thing, I can keep it within there, and you don't have to, jump to microservices because you're forced to set up Node. There's a bunch more. The deploy activate thing is so that you can deploy from CI and then activate from production, so that they stay like exactly in sync. So there's all kinds of other great stuff. We can do pre-warming, so you can pre-warm 100 containers. Like, if you're doing server-side rendering and you deploy a change but you don't want your page speed to drop, you can pre-warm 100 containers and then activate it, so you don't have the Lambda cold boot thing. So take a look at the docs. There's a ton more. That is basically all of that I have. I have a slide that says that's all that I have. So that's all that I have. So Frake, back to you.
Yeah, this was really mind-blowing, Aaron. Really. Let me show you some stuff from the comments here, and it got
Sure.
all over here. Man, that is so cool. Whoa,
No, thanks.
amazing stuff. And here another one, and I totally agree with this. This is some Laracon level stuff. So I think you nailed it in this talk.
Well, thanks. That was my first talk, my first live coding experience. I'm just so happy that AWS didn't crap out on me.
Yeah, I was saying that in the comments here as well, that it's really courageous to do that, because, yeah, if at this moment AWS would crash, then people would have seen this awesomeness.
Yeah.
Yeah, personally, I really like, yeah, how polished that this package feels. You showed that to response method, and I thought, yeah, that's something that you added for yourself, and you saw that,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this is very nice for others
Yeah.
too.
Yep.
What I'm also thinking is, yeah, you showed us a couple of cool use cases already, like yeah, visiting URL, getting a screenshot, generating an image. I'm thinking, and maybe it already is out there. Wouldn't it be very nice if those would be also packages as well, for if
Yes.
people
Big
just want
time.
want to create an image?
Yep.
There's already a sidecar package for that with a
Yep.
decent API on the Lambda function.
Yes. If anyone creates a sidecar packaged up function, let me know. I will put it anywhere I can as publicly as possible, because I think having those off the shelf ready to use is going to be extremely nice for everyone.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm also feeling that this talk, it would also benefit from like a part two with like how does it work behind the scenes, you
Yeah,
know?
a deep dive. It's kind of
Yeah,
fun. Yeah.
yeah. I can imagine. I can imagine like zipping the stuff and sending it to
Uh-huh.
AWS. So
Yeah, there's some cool stuff in there. Like the zip file never hits your disk. It uses streams, so it does a zip stream and then sends it off. And yeah, it's fun.
maybe we need to talk about the part two,
Yeah,
Aaron. But first, you should rest a little bit and just feel
yeah.
happy with yourself because you did really an awesome job here, I think.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Thanks again for having me.
Is there something else that you want to plug uh, at the
Nope,
end?
just Aaron D Francis on Twitter. Let me know how you use Sidecar.
Okay, cool. Thanks again, Aaron. And until the next time.
Bye.
Okay, people. That was the first talk. I hope that you liked it as much as I did. We are going to have a little break now, and we'll be back with Luke's talk in just a few minutes. Enjoy the break. Welcome back to the second part of the meetup. Yeah, I'm still amassing my brain back because my brain exploded in the last talk. But the next talk is also going to be very good. The next talk is by Luke Downing, somebody who's helping out with Pest a lot. Personally, I've been using Pest and discovering Pest while I was recording a course on testing, and it's clear that Luke has had many useful contributions there. Now, when I invited Luke to the meetup, it was supposed to be a live talk, but Luke had to travel to a place today where there isn't a stable Wi-Fi connection. So we decided it would be safer to just record his talk. So we have a recording of his talk titled, let me see, Pest to Perfection. If everything is correct, then Luke is in the chat. So if you have any questions for Luke during the talk, just chat with him. Okay, with that being said, let's take a look at Luke's talk. Here we go.
Hey everybody, I am super excited to be here. Thank you so much for coming along and listening to my talk. I'm thrilled to be talking about Pest again. It's amazing to be able to even speak at conferences, and I just want to say, 6 months ago, I would never dream that I would be doing this today. So it is insane that I am able to. Thank you so much to everyone who has a part in organizing things like this. It is amazing for the community. It really gets us all excited about code and Laravel and open source and all the rest of it. So thank you so much for coming along and supporting. My name's Luke Downing. You can find me on Twitter at LukeDowning19. I'm actually currently on holiday, so this talk is pre-recorded, but I'm in the chat. So I'll be on the chat talking now. If you have any questions, ideas, suggestions, thoughts, drop them in the chat. I'll respond in real time. So in a way, it's even better than a live talk. Failing that, this is Pest to Perfection. I really hope you enjoy. Just a little bit about me, in case you don't know who I am. I'm a developer from the United Kingdom. I own my own company, Downing Tech, but I freelance for lots of companies. Primarily, I'll be starting freelancing for Worksome soon, so I'm really excited about that, and no doubt I'll be talking about that on Twitter in the near future. I've been using PHP professionally for around 8 years, so I'm quite familiar with PHP, and I picked up Laravel around Laravel 5, so I've been using Laravel for a little while too. I'm a member of the Pest PHP core team, so I help daily with maintenance and adding new features. So I am a little bit biased with this topic, I guess, but I want to say that I wasn't, how can I put this? I wasn't invested in PHP or Pest PHP from the beginning. I was actually added as a core member fairly recently after I picked Pest up, really enjoyed it, and started creating content and adding features to Pest. So I guess the bottom line is that I am absolutely a lover of open source software. I think it is incredibly important. I think it's the reason pretty much everyone here has a job. And I don't think that programming would be anywhere near as enjoyable without it. Which is why I think it's really our responsibility to look after and care for open source. It's something that's been placed in our hands as an amazing tool, but we have to care for it. We have to put the time and maintenance and effort in. So if you've not jumped into the world of open source yet, into contributing and helping maintain things, try it. Just try it. It doesn't have to be anything big, and I guarantee that you won't feel you've wasted your time. I think the most important thing here is to explain what Pest PHP actually is. You've probably heard of Pest. If you haven't, then I'm sorry. Hopefully I can explain exactly what Pest is in this talk. But the bottom line is that it's really a testing framework that sits on the shoulders of PHP Unit. So PHP Unit is the testing framework that comes out of the box with Laravel, and it's super powerful, like really powerful, and it's very stable. I have never experienced a bug in PHP Unit. It is extremely stable. And that means that Pest has an amazing head start. Now, what does Pest offer that PHP unit doesn't? Well, Pest, rather than going for classes and methods, instead opts for a jest-like functional syntax. So you don't write methods, you write functions. And that removes a lot of boilerplate around your test code. It was created by Nuno Maduro, so Nuno works for Laravel if you didn't know. And that means that Pest is tailored towards the Laravel community. Now, it can be used in bare PHP, it can be used with Cake PHP, it can be used with Symfony, it can be used with any PHP project, but it's tailored for Laravel. And you'll see that as you start using it. It becomes very obvious that Nuno was thinking of Laravel users. Currently, it has over 600,000 installs, and that number is growing rapidly. I think we're entering the Pest golden age, so I just want to say, go pick it up. You don't have to use it professionally. If you don't like it, fine, but at least try it. Don't be one of those people who just hate on something for no good reason. Go try it in a personal project. I think you're going to absolutely love using Pest. This talk is split into 3 sections. The first is writing a basic Pest test. If you've never used Pest before, how do you get started? What's the first test you write? So I'll do that for us, and I'll walk you through how to write a Pest test. We'll then refactor that Pest test to use higher order tests, and I'll show you how that can really make your testing code more readable and easier to maintain. In part 2, we're going to refactor one of our tests to use data sets instead of repeated code. And this is a really powerful concept. It's similar to data providers in PHP unit, although I will say there is a lot of boilerplate to PHP unit providers. Datasets are super easy to use. I use them all the time because of how quick it is to build one out. In part 3, we're going to go a little crazy, and we're going to refactor some code to domain-specific language. Now, if you're not familiar with that term, don't worry. It's basically a fancy business term for an API that is surrounded by the business logic. So I think Alex from the Pest core team put this best in this little snippet I have. A higher level, more expressive API based on your business terminology. It's easy to read and understand, not just for the developers, but also for the rest of the team. So I want to show you how Pest's functional style plays perfectly into the hands of a domain-specific language. I think you're really going to enjoy that section of the talk, but before we get there, let's jump into our project and write some initial Pest tests. In this project, we have a web.php file, as most Laravel projects do, and you can see we have 3 routes, a login route, a register route, and this profile route here. As you'd expect, the login and register route are behind the guest middleware. So basically, if you're a guest, you can see these pages. If you're not a guest, if you're authenticated, then it redirects. Our profile route is the opposite. It's behind the auth sanctum middleware, which means if you are a guest, you are forbidden and redirected to login, whereas if you're a user, you can see this page. However, we have this custom secure username routes middleware, and this is going to ensure that only you can see your profile. So each user has a unique username. If your username is not this here, you won't be able to see this particular profile. So George couldn't see Luke's profile, for example. That's a basic overview of this application. It doesn't do tons, but it's enough to get us started with Pest. I'm going to head over to the terminal here, and I'm going to create our login test file. And as long as you have the Laravel plugin installed, then you can run php artisan pest:/test, and we'll call this login test. And you'll see that Pest goes ahead and creates the login test for us, which is super useful. Let's jump into that login test, and we'll see that Pest has actually already set up a test for us. Let's see if this works. I'm going to run pest, which is an alias I have for vendor bin pest, and you'll see that we actually have a passing test, which is amazing. We didn't write any code, we already have a passing test. And this works because basically the login route has no middleware, it has no authentication, and anyone can access it, which is why we get a response of 200. So while this is awesome, I actually want to write our own tests. So I'll remove this base test, and we'll start with the it function, which is basically one of the test functions you can use in Pest. There's also test, but both have the same arguments. The first is a description of the test, so it can be accessed by a guest. The second is a closure, and this closure is going to contain our testing code. So inside the closure, we can make use of anything in the PHP unit test case. So any PHP unit code, more or less, is valid inside this closure. That means we have access to this because this has been rebound to the closure, which means that we can say this get root login and assert that it's okay. And if we run this, you'll see we have the same passing test. Awesome. That wasn't too difficult, was it? Let's write our second test. It cannot be accessed by a user. We'll open up our function again, and we want to say this, and then we need to authenticate as a user, and we can use the B function or method in Laravel for that. We need to pass in a user, so let's say user factory, and instead of using create, I'm actually going to use make so that we don't persist to the database. In this case, we don't need to. It makes our test faster. So yeah, this be a user factory make, and then we want to say get the root login and assert a redirect. And let's just break this onto a few lines so that it's easier to read. We'll run our suite again, and now we have two passing tests. Well, that was easy. We were able to do that very quickly, and we have now tested that this page does what we'd expect. But before we copy this over to the register root, I think we should spend some time refactoring these to higher order tests. Now, I want to just talk about why we do this. Some people are of the opinion that you should just write your tests and then move on, that you shouldn't spend long writing tests. I actually disagree with that for the same reason that I would say it's always worth it to refactor your code. You are going to have to maintain your tests for the lifetime of the application, and often the tests actually live longer than the underlying code. So, in my opinion, it is paramount that you spend time making sure your tests are easy to understand, are easy to maintain, and make sense not just to you but to other people. So higher order tests in Pest PHP give us that superpower. They give us the opportunity to really think about our test code. They also remove a lot of boilerplate, which makes it easy to read. So let's refactor our first test here to higher order. In order to do so, I just remove this closure. I close the it method out, and I'm going to remove the boilerplate from the bottom of this here. We'll remove a call to this so that we end up with a chained method call. It can be accessed by a guest, get the root login, and assert OK. This is a higher order test. However, as you've probably already guessed, when I run this, I get a failure. The failure is that the target class URL does not exist. And this is actually happening because it's attempting to execute this root helper, which requires the Laravel container to be booted. But at the time of it being executed, Laravel doesn't exist because create's application in our base test case hasn't yet run. So we need a way to defer the execution of this root helper. Well, you probably know that in PHP we can defer things using closures. And that would fix our problem. But if we run this, it's going to say that argument 1 must be of type string, but a closure has been given. So how can we fix that? Well, seeing as we have access to the test case, why don't we create our very own version of the get method in Laravel? Let's go to that test case, and let's say I want to override get. And you can see that PHP Storm has shown us that this is indeed an overridden method. And we will return parent get, just like that. And I'm going to pass in URI and headers. But instead of just passing in the URI, which would be a string, I'm going to say, give me the value of the URI. And in case you didn't know, value returns the default value of the given value. It's a Laravel helper function that you should be using all the time because it's so handy. You see all it's doing underneath is checking if it's an instance of a closure, and if it is, it executes the closure. Otherwise, it just returns the value. In this case, it basically means that when we run it, it all works. Now it can be accessed by a guest, it cannot be accessed by a user. And if we come back to our login test, we have a beautiful higher order test. And if we compare these two tests, I think you can see why taking the time to refactor to higher order is worth it. How beautiful is that first test? Let's convert our second test to higher order. So we remove this closure. Let's get rid of the boilerplate at the bottom. We'll remove the call to this, and then we'll reformat. Now we already have handled this get here. We can pass a callable to that. But if we run our tests again, we have another error, unknown format first name. And the reason is exactly the same as our previous error, but just on a different method, this time B. The factory requires Laravel to be booted, and at this time it hasn't been booted. So we may think, well, let's override B, and let's allow that to also be a closure. We can do that, but I actually think there's a better way in this case. Seeing as we're going to be authenticating as users a lot in this application, it would make more sense if we created a helper method called asUser. And let's allow us to pass in an optional username. So if I pass in Luke, it will create a user with the username of Luke. Okay, let's make that happen. So we'll get rid of this call to B. We'll say asUser, and then we'll go back into our test case and we'll create the asUser method. AsUser that accepts an optional string of username, and it's going to say this be user factory, and we can use the state helper to make this work. If there is a username, then pass in the username, otherwise pass an empty array, and then please make the user. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Basically, we've removed the manual call to creating the user using a user factory, and we can simplify it to a call to asUser where we can customize the username if we want. If we now come back here and run the tests again, you'll see that they are passing. And that means that we have actually refactored both of these tests to beautiful higher order tests. I hope that you follow. I hope you can see why refactoring to higher order tests is a good idea, and how with a little bit of tweaking we can actually build out insanely useful helper methods that increase our speed when we're writing tests later down the line. I think we're ready to move on to our redirect tests. So let's say PHP artisan pest test. I did say redirect, I meant register test. And if you don't like pest test and you'd rather use make test, which is probably what you're used to with PHP unit, don't forget that you can customize stubs in Laravel. So you can customize the test stub and just replace it with a generic pest file. Okay, so if you prefer to use PHP artisan make test, that is entirely possible. I'm going to copy this code here, and we'll open up that newly created register test, drop our code in, and remember to replace login with register. And if we run pest again, we now have 4 tests, 2 test register, 2 test login. Now it's a little bit annoying that we had to copy and paste our tests. It can lead to false positives, it can lead to errors, and the more you have to copy and paste in tests, the more annoying things become. So we'll try and tackle that a little bit later, but in the meantime, I want to move on and take a look at a more complex set of tests. And we can do that in a test case I created earlier called the profile root test. So we'll boot this up, and you can see we have 3 tests here. If I run those tests, you can see under profile root test we have it cannot be accessed by a guest, it can be accessed by a user called Luke, but Luke's profile cannot be accessed by anybody but Luke, so no other user can access my profile. Can we refactor these to higher order? Well, for the most part we can, but I wanted to put this test here in to show you that it's okay to not refactor in certain cases. So it is actually possible to refactor this to higher order, but it would take a lot of work because we actually have to implement our own version of assert redirect, which would mean returning a custom test response from the get method. So it would be basically a ton of work for very little benefit. And in this case, it makes much more sense just to leave it as a standard closure. It's readable, it's easy to see, and the effort doesn't justify the work it would take. So I'm not saying that every single test you write has to be done in higher order. I'm just saying make sure that you've checked whether or not it can be done easily in higher order first, rather than just passing it off and leaving it. So with that in mind, let's move to our second test, which can be refactored quite easily to higher order. So we'll close that off early. We'll remove the boilerplate as before, remove the call to this, refactor. We can now use our as user helper, and we'll just pass our username of Luke in there. And for the get method, we can pass a closure. If we run it again, we are going to have a passing test, and this is now higher order. Let's move on to our third test, which is somewhat more complex. Basically, in this one, we have a bunch of users, and we loop over each user, and we check that everyone is forbidden because they aren't Luke. Okay? Now this is okay. It works. You can see it passes. But our eyes are drawn to this array, and this array isn't important. As long as Luke isn't in these users, it could be anything. What's important is this piece of code here. So can we refactor this in a way that would draw our eyes to the actual code rather than to the data that we want to provide the code with? We can using something called datasets. And they're as easy as chaining on a with method. So we chain a with method like that, pass an array, and as soon as we have an as user helper now, I think it would be best if we just reduce all of these users down to their usernames. And we'll grab all of them and we'll drop them in this array at the bottom here. And as soon as we make use of the with method, we're actually able to receive one of these usernames in the function, in the closure that we pass for our test. So with that in mind, we can now remove this for each, and rather than saying b, we can say as user and pass in the username. And if we run this, we've actually got an error, call to member function get on null. So why would that be being caused? Let's have a look. I never return from as user, that's fine. Let's run it again, and you'll see we don't just get 3 tests, we now get a load of tests, 1 test for each username in this array. I think that's really powerful, and if we want to add another user, for example, let's say Steve, we run this again, you'll see that Steve gets added, and anywhere that we use this, or these set of users, we're going to be able to run lots of tests very quickly. So it's really powerful for writing out large test sets in very little time. One thing that's annoying about this is the fact that if I wanted to use these usernames again, I'd have to repeat myself. I'd have to copy this array, paste it, copy it, paste it. I don't want to do that. Luckily, Pest has already come up with a solution to this called shared datasets. So we can say PHP artisan pest dataset, and let's create a dataset called usernames. You can see that it builds a file inside the datasets directory called usernames.php. I'm going to preemptively copy this array, and then let's head to the usernames file. Inside this file, you'll notice it's used this dataset function. And the dataset function takes 2 arguments. The first is the name of the dataset. It's called it usernames based on what we passed here in the command, but you can call this whatever you want. The second is the data that should be returned. So I'm going to replace that function with this array of usernames. Let's head back to our code, and I'm going to say with usernames, and then I'm going to run this test again. And you'll see we have the exact same result, but now we've abstracted the data to a shared location, so any test can make use of that data set very easily. And we'll see an example of that a little later on. Second question, can we refactor this to higher order tests? Well, you may think no, and you may just give up thinking there's no point, but I want to show you that it's actually quite easy, and it will simplify this test and make it look absolutely gorgeous. Let's start by removing the boilerplate as we usually do with higher order tests. Reformat. Obviously, if we run this now, we're going to get an error, undefined variable username. In other words, it doesn't know what this is supposed to be. Well, just as we did for the get root, wouldn't it be nice if we could pass a closure in here? And what if that closure received the current data set? So if we were testing with the username of Nuno, then this would be Nuno. But the next test, when it tests, say, with Frake, this would be Frake. Let's just fix the closure there while we think about it. And then we'll head into our as user, and we'll say that this doesn't have to be a string. It can be a string or a closure. Now we're going to make use of the value function again that Laravel provides. So we'll say, give me the value of username, but I want to pass it an argument. The argument I want to pass it is whatever data you gave me for this test. So yeah, execute the closure. If it's just a string, I'm just going to pass the string straight in. But if it's a closure, I'm going to pass in any data that I was given. So if we come back and now we run this test again, you'll see that we receive all of the data in a higher order test. So you can actually make use of data sets inside higher order tests using the getProvidedData method. And it's really powerful. There are so many cool things you can do with that. So I encourage you to go check out data sets, higher order tests, play around and see what you can come up with. All right, I think this is looking really neat. So it would be a good time to move on to part 3 of our talk. Let's head back to our login test. Remember earlier we copied and pasted this into register, and I was saying it's annoying that we have to copy and paste. You may now, after part 2 of this talk, think, well, datasets are the answer. Why don't we create a dataset that includes all of the routes that we want to test behind the guest middleware? And then we'll just perform these tests once, but we'll pass the dataset in. So we can say like with guest routes, for example. Now this works. I've used this paradigm before, but it falls short in a couple of places. First of all, what if there are extra tests that you want to perform on that particular route? That means that your tests are in 2 separate locations and it becomes difficult to maintain. And if you have a large team, people will forget that there is a data set for a particular idea. And so what they'll end up doing is just implementing the test manually. And so you'll have a mixture of manual tests and dataset tests. You do not want that. I think there is actually a much better way. I've been playing with this idea for a few weeks with my friend Sam Rowden, and we really like it. We think it's super powerful. I can't wait to see what the Laravel community can come up with, because I think that they could take it to the next level. We are going to write a domain-specific language for testing, and we're going to use Pest to do it. Imagine if we could inspect a route. So what if we could say, I'm going to come into this test case and I want to inspect the route login. And I want to say, look, it can be accessed by a guest, but I want to check that anyone who is in that username array or usernames array dataset is forbidden. So inspect login, check that it can be accessed by a guest, but check that it forbids any of those users. Let's go ahead and see if we can build this domain-specific language. We need to obviously add our inspect function somewhere, And the best place to do that kind of stuff is in the pest.php file. So we'll add a function called inspect. It receives the root that we're interested in inspecting. And why don't we return a new class that we can build our Fluent interface with? So return new tests, DSL for domain specific language. This is obviously not documented anywhere, so we can do whatever we want. We can call it anything we'd like. But yeah, I'll go tests DSL root inspector, and we'll pass in the root we were given. Okay, let's go to tests and create a new directory called DSL. And in DSL, let's create a new class called root inspector. Awesome. So now we have our root inspector. We can try running this again, but it's going to say there is no method called guest. Let's add our method, public function guest. It's going to be Fluent, so we'll return this. And inside here, we need our test to ensure that you can log in as a guest. So we'll come back to the login test here. And let's copy and paste this test. We know that this works. Also in the constructor of this, we want to say, make the root that was passed in a member of this class. And that allows us to use it here. So we can say this root, just like that. Okay, if I come back to my login test now and I comment this out, and let's close guest off early and run pest, you can see that login test actually did run our DSL because it can be accessed by a guest was executed. So the first part of our DSL is up and running. How cool is that? I think that is so clean. Okay, let's continue. Let's try and add this forbids method. So we'll come back to our root inspector. We'll add a new function, public function forbids. And we'll say, look, you can pass in a data set. It's going to return itself. So return this. And let's come back to our login test. We'll copy this test because this is checking that they can't access it. And we can replace this with this root. Like that. If we run this, it's actually going to work. It executes, but it's not making use of our data set. However, we've already done all the work in the previous tests to add this functionality very quickly. So we can say as user, pass a closure, receive the username and return that username. And we can say with, pass in the data set. And if we run this again, you're going to see that our login test just received a bunch of extra tests for absolutely nothing, for free. If we go to the usernames dataset and we add another name in here, let's say Tom, and we run this again, you'll see that Tom is added here and here. So we're getting extra tests for absolutely no work at all. And our login test looks as simple as this. We built all of these tests with a line of code. How cool is that? I really hope you can see how impressive DSL, thanks to the functional style of Pest, could be. There could be packages for Laravel around authentication, routing, mail, storage, everything, and it would help people to be able to very quickly come on board with testing and build out amazing test suites in literally minutes. Okay. But you may be thinking, it's a little bit set in stone. There will be routes that don't want to check, for example, that a guest sees 200. They want to check that you see particular text. Well, two things. There's nothing, for one, to stop us writing an actual pest test here. So it shows the correct info. Okay, so we could write our own pest test here, and this will actually fire alongside our DSL tests. But maybe there's a better way. What if we could define what success is on a DSL test case basis? So in this case, we receive the response, and we'll say response assert C, please log in. And if you're wondering where that comes from, you'll see that our login route just returns please log in. So what if we define our own success handler? Well, let's make that a thing. We'll go back to our root inspector and let's say private success handler. And by default, the success handler is going to just say, here's the response, assert, OK. But if you use the success method, which is fluent, so we'll make it return this, then we're going to say, here's the success callback. We'll say this success handler equals success callback. Okay, that's all of the boilerplate we need to write to make this work. We now just need to make sure that guest makes use of it. And to do that, we're going to have to go back to using a function. And the reason for that is we need to be able to pass the result of get into our callback. So we can add a closure here, and we can say this success handler for this get this root, just like that. Now, when I run this, it's actually going to fail. And it's going to fail because it's going to say call to undefined method success handler. The reason this fails is because this closure has been rebound. So this no longer refers to the root inspector. However, we can fix that by simply saying root equals this root, success handler equals this success handler, and then we can refer to them using those variables rather than using this. So success handler root run tests are now passing. And to show you that that did actually work, if I head back to my login test and change this to please can you log in and run again, we're going to get an error. It's going to say failed asserting that please log in contains please can you log in. How awesome is that? We can now define custom success handlers on a test by test basis. Let's copy this. Let's go into our register test, and we can remove all of these functions now and replace it with some very simple DSL. If we don't need to specify custom success logic, we simply leave it out, and you'll see that our register test passes just fine. But if we want to say something like please register, run again, it's going to say failed setting that please log in contains please register. So let's take a look at why that would happen. I tell you why it would happen, because I never changed login. This is actually inspecting the register root. Run again, everything works. I'm not going to go any further because we could be here all day, but I hope that you can see the power that is made available to you with Pest. There are some insane things and territories that people haven't even thought about yet that are made possible thanks to Pest. And I think we're going to see some amazing things from the community coming very soon as Pest continues to increase in popularity. Okay, we are done with the code. I just want to finish by talking a little bit more about why you should use Pest. First of all, it's simple and it's easy to read. There is no boilerplate, there is nothing to get in the way. The only thing that will be in that test case are your tests. You'll see a nice description written in plain English, or even in a foreign language. If you aren't native English, you can write those descriptions in whatever language you want. You can use symbols, you can use spaces, you can use special characters, you can use anything to describe your tests. And especially with higher order tests, everything is just so readable. It's a pleasure to write. It's easily understandable when you come back to your code 6 months down the line. You probably didn't realize this, but there are no namespaces in Pest. Now you can add namespaces, for example, if you have duplicate function names, but by default, there is no need for namespaces. And you may think, well, why is that a plus? Basically, it means that refactoring your test suite is as simple as dragging and dropping the file. You don't have to go in and change the namespace. You don't have to rely on an IDE to do the work for you and probably get it wrong. You literally take the file in your Finder, you drag it, you drop it into a different directory. It couldn't be any simpler than that. I already discussed this, but the test names are so easy to understand. And in the terminal, they just read like documentation. In fact, you could take the output of your terminal and present that to your boss, to the client, to whoever, and they have a full list of exactly what your application does. How awesome is that? Higher order testing is a real boon. It helps you to slow down and just think about how to make your tests better. In my opinion, that will save you time in the long run, and it will make your testing experience more enjoyable. True story here, we have a project that it's not legacy, but it's big, right? 4,000 plus tests. And the tests were kind of an afterthought a little bit. We were just shoving things in there to make sure that everything worked properly. I actually hate going into that project now. Not just the tests, but the project itself. And the reason is the tests. I know I want to carry on writing tests, but everything is just so difficult. But because when writing higher order tests, you slow down a little bit, you think about what you're writing, then the test suites remain as beautiful as the code. And adding new tests becomes enjoyable. Now, we talked about this at the beginning of the talk, that Pest PHP is tailored for Laravel, but that is actually a huge bonus that deserves consideration. We class ourselves as artisans. We use Laravel because it's gorgeous, because it reads well, because it allows you to write simple and yet powerful code. Pest is written in the same style. It was designed to give you ultimate power. It was designed to allow you to use all of the sharp knives, but in a way that is beautiful, easy to understand. And so going from a Laravel application from your source code into your test suite feels just as beautiful. There's no gap, there's no distinction. It's not like, oh, I have all of this boilerplate here, but my Laravel application is so beautiful. It feels correct. It just feels right with Laravel. I can't stress that enough. I've used Pest in a good number of professional projects now, and I can say that I prefer it 100% over any other testing framework for the fact that it just fits with Laravel so beautifully. And I hope you've seen that it's extremely powerful and flexible. From datasets to higher order tests to higher order expectations, which we didn't talk about today, but which you should certainly go and check out, to full domain-specific language as and when you require it, Pest is unparalleled when it comes to its power and flexibility. And I just hope you've had a sniff, a snippet, a morsel of that power and flexibility today. Finally, I want to say a huge thank you again for coming and listening to my talk. I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope it gave you some ideas. I hope you can get out there and start contributing to Pest, to the open source community, to Laravel, and just enjoy your time. We are amazing. We have an amazing privilege to be able to write code that can change lives, not just your life, but the lives of other developers. Like, the code we write in open source helps other developers do their job better. And that is an amazing feeling. So go out there and just enjoy working with Pest, with Laravel, creating your projects and building awesome things. You can find me on Twitter at LukeDowning19. Come say hi. You can find me on GitHub and see the work that I do at Luke Raymond Downing. And thank you again for listening. I really appreciate your time, guys. I'm going to hand back now, and I'll say see you later.
Wasn't that an amazing talk? Very well done, Luke. I really like the enthusiasm and all the neat things that you put in Pest. It's just amazing. That DSL idea, it's a great one, and I agree that we're going to see some awesome things with this in the future. So thanks again, Luke, for putting this video together and all the work that you put into Pest. So we're at the end of the meetup. I hope that you liked it as much as I did. Next month we're going to have a new one. Probably at the end of October. I still have to confirm my guests, but I'll announce the guests in a couple of days. So take a look at my Twitter account for that. So we're at the end. I hope you enjoyed it, and until the next time. Bye-bye.